What's going on YouTube? So welcome back to the garage. We got the bikes lined up and I wanted to make a video about bikes I've had in the past, and I'm getting a little bit older now. I'm in my 30s, that's crazy to say, but I bought my first cruiser. And if you're thinking about making the switch from a crotch rocket to a cruiser, I wanted to share my experiences with you and just give you some more information. So with this video, it should help you guys decide if you're actually ready for the switch getting into a cruiser style motorcycle. So these are my three bikes I currently own. I'll give you a quick rundown. This is a 2012 Aprilia RSV4. It's got intake, exhaust, and a race ECU flash right from Aprilia. So it's pretty much set up. It runs high 10s in the quarter, really fun bike. This is my 2015 Victory Highball, picked it up this year. It's full stage 1, so it's got intake, Conquest 2-to-1 pipes on it. It's dyno tuned with a power commander. I do have a Lloyd's timing gear installed as well. And then I have Lloyd's quarter turn throttle on it. And a couple other little goodies, more cosmetic stuff, but fairly basic setup, stage 1 bike. And this is my R6. I've had tons of R6s over the years, but this has been the one that stuck around the longest. Super reliable, absolutely love these bikes. So a little bit of background information on me. I've been riding for over a decade. I'm a pretty hardcore bike enthusiast. I love performance. Basically, the faster the bike, the better. My very first bike was a CBR 1000 RR. I've had a couple of CBR 1000 RRs, a couple of R1s, more R6s than I can count. Now the Aprilia, a little bit more fancy, more tech on it. But I've tried tons of bikes, but they've all been crotch rockets. This has been my first cruiser style bike, this Victory in front of us. Being a motorcycle enthusiast like myself, I figured it was time. I'm in my 30s now, had to try a cruiser. So I'm pretty impressed with the Victory so far. I like it more than I thought I would, but let me start out by saying in this video, I really don't think it's gonna replace the crotch rockets 100%. So if it's in your budget to have two bikes at the same time, I would recommend trying one before you sell your sport bike, before you commit to it 100%. If you take any information away from this video, this is it. If you're coming off a crotch rocket, do not buy an 883 iron or a 1200 Sportster for your first bike. They are grossly underpowered and way overpriced. For 5 to 10 grand, you can get well over 100 cubic inches. Yamaha has a lot of options, and so does Victory, like I have. Shop around, try and get something over 100 cubic inches. A lot of Harleys in the high 90s, which are okay, but Harleys are pretty expensive as well, so just shop around. It's impossible for a cruiser to replace the performance a sport bike offers. And that's just facts. And I know what you're thinking. Hey, the cruisers aren't supposed to be fast, but they're torquey. And yeah, they are torquey, but torquey doesn't mean it's a fast bike, has a lot of performance. They're great cruisers. They make all their power at low RPM. Like the Victory starts pulling hard at 2000 RPM. You can crack wide open throttle, it's not bogging at that RPM. It's happy there. That's what it's made for. Whereas the Aprilia, even though it's a 1000cc bike, if you crack wide open throttle below 5000 RPM, it's bogging, it's shaking, it's really not happy at that RPM. It loves the high RPM. And then of course, smaller displacement crotch rockets, they're even more exaggerated, right? This R6 doesn't start pulling until 8,000 RPM, makes all its power above 10,000. So completely different worlds, right? This 600cc bike will still be way faster than this 1700cc bike. But part of the reason behind that, this bike has a good 200 pounds, maybe even close to 300 pounds, depending on the sport bike you're comparing it to. So that's a lot more weight to be packing around, but that does transition into a very smooth ride. The weight of this bike is very comfortable once it's moving. It soaks up road bumps very well. You could cruise on it all day. It's very comfortable. If you are picking a cruiser, one thing I would watch out for is just bar height, because everybody loves to modify the bars on these. I would choose a bar that's shoulder height or lower if you're going for comfort. I was a little nervous about this one being kind of even with my shoulder height. I thought my arms would get tired after a while, but it's really not bad. It's still more comfortable than the Rockets. So shoulder height or lower, I think, is the play if you're going to be riding this and having a lot of seat time, kind of day after day road trips. One thing that really impressed me with the high handlebars, the mirrors are so close to you. There's no blind spots. The visibility is awesome. You can see everything behind you. As compared to the Rockets, the mirrors are kind of on the front fascia here. They're really far away from you. They're kind of more for legal reasons, and they do the bare minimum. On this Aprilia, you almost have to move your body out of the way to see anything behind you. So they're almost useless. So your first thoughts when you hop on this Victory, take it around the block, obviously you notice the weight. That's the first thing you notice. But I was really impressed with how it handles. Starting your lean angle and initiating corners on this Victory is almost easier than the sport bike. These skinny tires, it leans over almost instantly. And the back tire is a big part of that. It's got a skinny back tire on it too. If you say chose a Victory Gunner with a big fatty on the rear, it's not gonna handle as well, but very impressed with the handling on this bike. Of course, you don't get as much lean angle as a Rocket, but it leans in just as easy. One nice perk to the cruiser tires, they're a lot harder than a dual or triple compound sport bike tire. Even though the sport bike tires are usually dual compounds, harder in the center, softer on the side for performance, they only last 5,000 kilometers, if that. So if you're doing road trips with them like we do, you're replacing your tires sometimes halfway through your road trip. Nice perk to the cruiser, don't have to worry about that. They last way longer. So handles really well for what it is. Let's talk about the brakes. So Rockets, they all have great brakes. We got big Brembos, dual discs on each side. On the Aprilia, even the R6 has big dual disc brakes. Not Brembos, but they perform. They're basically overkill for the size of bike. And these, it's insane. You have twice as much weight and half the braking. So you don't even have a disc on this side at all. It's almost the bare minimum. You got one little caliper, one rotor, and even the rotor is smaller than the R6. It's insane. On the sport bikes, I'm a one finger braker, and that's more than enough effort to stop these bikes in a hurry. On the Victory, one finger is not enough. You need 2 fingers minimum, and you still apply more force with 2 fingers than you do on the sport bikes with 1. So you really feel that weight when you're trying to slow down. One thing I'm impressed with though, the Victory carries a lot of weight over the rear tire, just the placement of the engine and the chassis design. So the rear brake performs better on the Victory than the sport bikes. Because the sport bikes, you have a lot of your weight over the front, just where the engine is placed. And if you're hard on the back brakes with a sport bike, you're probably familiar, they just lock up. They don't really do a whole lot because there's not enough weight. As soon as you start braking, the weight transfers to the front. Whereas the Victory, the weight doesn't really transfer that much when you're braking hard, so you still have a lot of weight over that rear tire, and it bites way better than the sport bikes. The next thing you're gonna notice riding these 2 bikes back to back is the transmissions. So the Aprilia, the transmission is so smooth in this thing. It's got a quick shifter on it, don't even have to use the clutch. You can bang gears all day long. You barely even feel it shift. It's so smooth. Go over to the Victory. It feels like the transmission is just heavy in this thing. It's very clunky and notchy. It almost feels outdated, but it works very well. The clutch is pretty heavy on it. Very easy to find neutral compared to the Aprilia. The Aprilia with the quick shifter and everything, if you're at a stoplight, very hard to find neutral. But they both work very well. Just complete opposite sides of the spectrum. Everybody knows these cross rocket seats are basically just a thin chunk of foam, no give to them, really hard, no comfort at all. Moving over to the Victory, super soft, plush. My ass melts into the seat. You can spend some time in that, no problem. If you're doing lots of start and stop traffic, you notice the seat height on the sport bikes a lot more. It almost feels like you need a ladder to get on these things sometimes. Like I'm almost tippy-toeing to get on the Aprilia. The seat height on these is very low, very comfortable. One thing, depending on your pipe configuration, you have to make sure you get your right side leg out far enough so it's not too close to the pipes. I did burn myself on this pipe, even with the little heat shield it has. It's not enough. Those pipes get very hot very fast. Just something to be careful about. So it definitely makes sense why you see a lot of guys heat wrapping, coming off the manifold kind of right halfway down to where your leg would potentially touch it. Makes sense. So with the big difference in seat height, your body is more angled on the Rockets, kind of an attack position, right? Sport bike. That makes it handle better, but it is not comfortable. And if you're kind of just cruising on the highway, I find my head is kind of angled forward and then up. So it's really hard on your neck and you don't really see as much of the scenery. The Cruiser, way better that way. So because you're sitting lower, your back is straight up and down, the bars are closer to your body. My head is straight up and down and you see way more of the countryside. If you're just riding casually, this bike, you enjoy it more. And that's one thing I noticed. So the Victory, it doesn't matter if you're riding it really aggressive, it's fun. You're riding it casual, it's still pretty fun. This bike is pretty fun all around, no matter how you're using it. The sport bikes, they're kind of a different story, right? Every time you hop on it, you want to grab wide open throttle, you want to use that quick shifter, maybe you want to do wheelies. Like, these bikes are the most fun when you're riding them stupid. I hate to say it, but they really test your willpower. You'll get way more tickets. The Cruisers, you just get on and ride. Doesn't matter what you're doing, they're still pretty fun. Cops don't even look at you on these things. You can grab a couple of gears, wide open throttle, and I've seen cops in the other lane, and they don't even really bother you too much. Even though these pipes are really loud, louder than the sport bike, cops don't hassle you. Cops hate crotch rockets. They'll hassle you for your license plate location, like anything they can get you for. So that's a huge upside to the Cruiser. You just don't get hassled. Sport bike riders, I feel like they just assume you're a younger kid and you're just out breaking the law, tearing the streets up, right? And now that we're talking about getting noticed on the bikes, funny story about the Victory. So I picked it up, brought it home on a U-Haul trailer, and I thought it was kind of just luck of the draw who you were passing at the time, but I got 3-4 thumbs up from different people along the way on the way home. All middle-aged men, of course, which really made me second guess my decisions. But anyways, I've had more people compliment that Victory and give me the thumbs up in a day or two than I ever have on crotch rockets over the last decade. It's crazy. People love those Cruisers. But if you don't want attention from middle-aged men and old men, don't get the Cruisers. The wife was making fun of me because that's actually her R6 on the end, and she was thinking about getting a Cruiser too. And after seeing how much attention I got from, let's just say, old men She's definitely not ready. She's just didn't want any part of that. So it'll definitely make you feel a little older than you want to feel. The next thing you're going to notice on these bikes, the tech. So the Aprilia is kind of an extreme example of this because it has wheelie control, launch control, quick shifter, ABS. It's pretty much got everything, so a ton of tech. The majority of the cruisers really don't have anything. Gauge cluster is very old school, pretty much basic setup. Speedo, you have a digital RPM gauge, tripometer, and a fuel light. No fuel gauge, just a low warning message. So very basic, bare minimum. Works well for what it is, but nothing fancy. Surprisingly enough, it's very visible where it's placed. I'm not sure how the Harleys would be when they have the gauge on the tank, but I'm content with it. The nice part about the cruisers being so simple and no tech, very easy to work on. Oil changes, like you can see the oil filter right at the back of the engine. You come to this side, oil filter right there, drain plug, boom, boom, done. You want to pull the air filter, one screw here, this pops off, air filter comes out. Everything on that bike is super easy to work on. Hopping over to an Italian sport bike like this, even the R6, very similar. Maintenance is a little harder. You want to check the air filter, you got to take the tank off. It has a whole bunch of electronics under the seat, kind of a pain. Oil changes, you got to take fairings off and everything. The R6 is even worse. You got to take the shifter linkage off to get to the oil filter. Oil filter on this bike is right behind the shift linkage, and it's very hard to get anything in there to torque it on and get it off. So there is an upside to simplicity. We'll just say that. So if you have all three of these bikes on the highway, obviously you're gonna notice the crotch rockets rev at about 5,000 RPM, just casually cruising, maybe even closer to 6, whereas the Victory is half of that, 2,500 RPM, 3,000 if you're booting on her. Doing, say, 130, 140K down the highway. The sport bikes, they're very comfortable at that speed. It feels almost slow because that's what they're made for. If you take that Victory up to 140, it feels like you are flying. The weight of the bike, the bar height, your body's straight up and down, so your body's just acting like a parachute. And it feels extremely fast. If you put a windshield on the front of them, it definitely helps, but it's still nowhere near what the rockets feel like at higher speeds. So if you need to get somewhere in a hurry, I'm not hopping on the Victory. I'm hopping on a sport bike still. But if you're riding these sport bikes aggressively, my low warning light can come on in this Aprilia after 100 kilometers. The tank is pretty small. It's not good on fuel being a V4, and you're filling up all the time. If you're babying the bike, getting 200 kilometers to a tank is a stretch. Whereas the Victory, it's got a bigger tank, it's made for road trips, you can go way farther on a tank. It probably even gets better fuel mileage, even though it's twice the displacement. It just operates at such a low RPM. It does really well for long distance, as long as you're driving it casually. One upside to the Victory on the highway as well, if you're going out to pass somebody, you don't have to downshift a bunch of times. It makes enough torque in the low RPM. You can just roll into throttle in 6th gear, pass anybody relatively easy. The sport bikes, you're downshifting once, twice. You're always trying to get those RPMs up to get in that happy torque curve to try and pass somebody in a reasonable amount of time. So that is a little bit of a downside to the sport bikes. The Victory makes almost just as much torque at 2,500 RPM as it does horsepower in the high RPM. So it really doesn't make a lot of sense revving the bike out all the time. Like when you go to pass somebody, use the bike for what it's made for, that low end grunt. One last thing to add, I picked up a headlight for my Victory
$50 off Amazon. Performs great. A lot of aftermarket options for the cruisers. You replace the whole headlight assembly. The Rockets don't really have a lot of options. You can put better bulbs in them, but the stock housings don't really cast light that well. So the Victory definitely wins in the headlight department.
So to sum everything up, these are all great motorcycles. You would likely be happy with any one you choose, but if you had to choose just one, oh, the $1 million question. So the obvious answer, cruiser for the highway, yes, that's kind of where it shines. I do like the sport bikes more for around town, zipping between lights, kind of riding a little more aggressively. In a perfect world, it'd be nice to have both, which I'm very fortunate to have at this moment. But after this year, I'm gonna have to sell one of these bikes because it's just not practical to have a ton of bikes at all times. Our summers are so short, we can only ride for a good 3-4 months out of the year. And if you want my honest opinion, my heart's still with the sport bikes. You just can't replace that performance for the price. I bought the Victory specifically for a road trip coming up. I really want to put some time on a different chassis and try out that completely different world, right? So I'm still really excited about it because the bike's fairly new to me, but after our road trip, I truly think the Victory is going to go up for sale unless something drastically changes, but hard decision. It really is. But at my age right now, I really want to spend a few more years on the sport bikes while I'm still in good enough shape. My body's able to do that and just take advantage of these bikes as long as I can. I'm always going to have at least 1 or 2 motorcycles in the garage. That's just who I am as a person. But at this exact moment in my life, I just don't know if I need a cruiser full-time yet. I'll have lots of time later in life to enjoy the cruisers a little more. I don't think I need to rush into that side of it. So to sum up this video and give you my thoughts kind of all in one here, my opinion, ride the Rockets for as long as you can. They're great bikes, they're cheap, they're awesome at what they are. Ride them as long as your body allows you. Because after a certain age, you're physically probably not going to want to. So I'm not going to push these bikes out of my life prematurely. Just my thoughts. Let me know if you guys agree. Drop a comment below if you've made it this far. And if you've made the switch to a cruiser, let me know what age you did it at. I'm curious because at this point in my life, I really don't know what that magic number will be. I can tell you early 30s is too soon for me. Might readdress it when I get closer to 40. So hopefully you got a little bit of value out of this video, and cheers guys. We'll catch you in the next one.